Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Ward, along with Andy Mercer. Andy Mercer and I have covered all aspects of the paranormal, with an emphasis on the patterns and connections that bind different elements of the unexplained together. We have a back library of shows that go back 3 to 4 years with interesting people, researchers, investigators, and authors in the entire realm of the paranormal. Andy Mercer can't be with us tonight, but let me introduce our great guest. Paul Sinclair is a UK author and researcher who lives in the seaside town of Bridlington on the East Yorkshire coast of the United Kingdom. He has been investigating strange phenomena around the area of East and North Yorkshire for many years and uncovered a deep history of folklore, strange sightings, and mysterious disappearances. Paul would describe himself first and foremost as a multi phenomenal researcher and would never want this singular label of UFO researcher or any other because he believes that everything within the subject is linked. Paul, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor.
Steve, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking and sharing bits of information with you guys today. And yeah, thanks for great intro as well. Absolutely brilliant. And yeah, the multi-phenomena research. I'm not sure that everybody subscribes to it, Steve, but I think the trend in thinking the last few years has moved away from I'm a UFO researcher and I pigeon everything into that hole, into that box, and I'm a cryptid researcher. Therefore, anybody who files a cryptid report and it has a bit of light form phenomena associated with it, I'm going to omit that because it doesn't fit into the criteria of what I believe a cryptid researcher should be. I think we've just got to throw the net wide and explore all avenues.
I think you're right. I think it's perfectly all right to specialize in certain areas, but sometimes people will ignore some of the, shall we say, high strangeness aspects or things that just don't quite fit into their preconceived ideas. And I think the one of the pioneers and was John Keel. He's a little bit like you. He did not like to be called a ufologist. He wanted to be called a Fortean
Yeah.
hailing back to Charles Fort, because I think you and I and John Keel all agree with Charles Fort when he said, you can begin to measure a circle anywhere.
What a brilliant analogy, and you absolutely agree with that. And I'm not breaking new ground here, Steve. Like you've just alluded to, Keel, Fort, Jacques Vallée. These people were thinking way out of the box and way ahead of their time. And I think certain factions of the subject of the unexplained are sort of catching on to this now. The truth proof books that I've written, there's 4 books, and then there's the one about my personal experiences. They all cover the full spectrum of the unexplained. And I will be honest and say that when I first started looking into this, I was probably biased due to experiences that had happened to myself during childhood, and it had put me on the path of UFO stroke abduction type research. And writing the first book, Steve, Truth Proof 1, I contacted a few newspapers local to my area and asked them if they'd kindly put a little article in for me saying that I'm looking for stories of the strange and unusual. And I got a few from an area called Flixton in North Yorkshire. And I realised some of your listeners who aren't familiar with the UK or this part of the UK will probably have to Google these areas. But I'm in Bridlington, and it's about 11 miles away from where I am now. But these didn't have anything to do with a UFO sighting or alien type phenomena. These had something to do with what people would term as a werewolf. And, when I first got those reports, because I'd never looked into anything like this, I kind of rolled my eyes. I didn't laugh, but, I'd got people, from what I could gather, perfectly sane, everyday human beings from different walks of life. I got 2 reports actually writing first book, but these people didn't know each other from the area of Flixton. to say that they'd seen this thing. Another one was to tell me that it went back into the annals of folklore, and had I looked into this strange bipedal creature that had been reported over decades and decades. And then the more I looked at it, Steve, if you want me to just run into this one a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I realized that even the place names, excuse me, even the place names had sort of connotations, not necessarily to the werewolf, but to the wolf. And you know, and I've touched on it many times. When the actual village of Flixton, it's got a neighbouring village called Folkton, and I think the road that runs through is I know it is. I think it's the A1039, and if there's one way in and one way out, it's a tiny village, even if you combined both villages. But it's a very old community that's there, and it's an old village itself. And back in 937 AD, that's going back well over 1,000 years, 1,086 years ago. The then King Athelstan had a refuge built at Flixton, and it was on the edge of an ancient lake bed, which modern man's called Star Car. I doubt if early man knew it as Star Car, but it was after the Ice Age. It was I think it's Paleolithic. So we're going back 8 to 11,000 years. I might not be 100% accurate with that, but I'm fairly close to the point. And he had a refuge built there on what's called the Cars, and nothing to do with motor vehicles. It's CARRS. It signifies reeds and elder and wetland. And this refuge was built to protect travellers 86 years ago, to protect travellers from wolves. And then it just added a little bit to the writing, and an infestation of savage beasts. And that got me thinking, because we know that wolves would have been apex predators in the United Kingdom, probably all over Europe over 1,000 years ago, but not the bear. So what was the infestation of savage beasts? Obviously, it doesn't say werewolf, but it's a fascinating add-on line, because I don't know what else we had in the United Kingdom that could have been an infestation of these savage beasts. And he also said that a certain portion of land in Flixton shall forever be known as Wolfland, and hence the title of our documentary, Wolfland. We that was the starting point for the documentary. But then you venture 2 to 3 miles from Flixton, and you come to another small village on the Wolds, Steve, and this is WOLDS, the Wolds. In kind of Yorkshire dialect, it means the wilds, the wild barren lands. And you come to another village called Hunmanby, and when you break it down, or when you look back in time, it means Hund meaning hound, and it's Hundmanby, and it means farmstead of the hound man. So we've got another connotation. Historians have said, obviously because they're not looking for the paranormal explanation, that it could be because the king kept his hounds there. So it's farmstead of the hound man. We can't discount that. But it's also interesting to note that for such a prestigious thing as the king keeping his hounds in Hunmanby, there's no historical record to say that that is actually true. So I find it fascinating that I'm looking into the stories of some fur-covered bipedal creature from an area called Flixton, and we've got all this history surrounding it with the ancient place names, plus the burial mounds, Wolf Howe and Howell Moor, and all these names attached. And then we get the stories coming out from residents and people passing through. 1940s, I got a story from a guy who lived in the village, recently passed away, but I mean, and he told me, well, when I first started going and doing a bit of research, I was in the churchyard of Fulton. I'll just draw back a little bit and give you a background on this man. And he lived near the church, and he asked me what I was doing. Beautiful summer's day, just having a wander around. My wife was with me, and I told him I was researching for a book and what I'd been told in the correspondence that I'd received, and he said he'd never heard of it. So that didn't put me off, but I thought, oh, fine, that's okay. And then 6 months later, I'm back in the village. I bump into him again, and he knew what I was looking for. And I said, did you realise that Wolfland was once called, sorry, Flixton was once called Wolflands and Hunanby, farmstead of the Hound Man? And he sort of wry smile. He said, oh, you've got that far, have you? I said, well, yeah. And, I said, and there's more connotations, and even old homes and farmsteads or farms that have long since gone into disrepair that were named after sort of dark and sinister things. He says, well, I'm going to tell you now. He said, I've seen it. And
Wow.
I couldn't believe what he was telling me, this old chap. He said to me, if you go out of the village and you go up onto what's called Staxton Brow, and Staxton Brow, people, if you want to Google these locations, it's very close to RAF Staxton Wold, which will be the oldest operational RAF base in the world. And Staxton Wold's built on a historic site. It's built, or the foundations of Staxton, RAF Staxton Wold are built on the foundations of a Roman hill fort. Looking across from Staxton Wold, you see a group of burial mounds. It's a barrow cemetery, and it's called Sharp How. And I've found 5. And when I say I've found, I'm not an archaeologist, people. I can see the remnants of 5 burial mounds. 2 of them are still very large by anyone's standards, but apparently there were 7 to 9 before, the farmer and his plough decided to, I don't know, slowly whittle them down and level the land out. He said, and we were up there in the 1940s. I believe he said 1948. That sticks in my mind. Me and another boy, summer's evening, we're just sort of doing what we do. There's no danger of being out, and unlike youths of today, sort of being out in 9, half past at night on a summer's evening. He says we were quite safe, and we're walking towards the burial mound, which is just out of the village, and there's a tree growing out of the side of it. And this thing is squatted down with its back to a tree. And he said it was looking at something in its hands. And he said hands. And we stopped in our tracks, and this creature, basically a human figure with the head of a wolf, looked at us, and we turned and ran. And it didn't pursue. So that kind of tells you there's something strange here. That it's not the actions of an apex predator. Not only that, I will hold my hands up and say that this thing, or these creatures that I'm talking about around Flixton and around the cliff tops of East and North Yorkshire that have been reported, and I've got lots and lots of reports, Steve, from people totally unconnected to one another, different backgrounds, different educations, different ages, all singing from a similar hymn sheet, all saying a similar thing. These things are not resident to the area. There would be carnage. We don't have the forests like they've got in America and these vast national parks. We've just not got that area. That said, with North Yorkshire is a big area, and I'll touch on that shortly. But I believe that they're coming from some other sphere of existence. There's something else. These things are truly paranormal. They've got all the attributes of something truly paranormal as well. In some instances, I've got reports of self-illuminating eyes, glowing red or amber eyes, which is not something that you associate with anything known in the animal kingdom. And we know we get bioluminescence with marine life, but I don't think I know we don't get it here in the UK. And I know we don't get what people have described, which is 7 to 8 foot tall bipedal fur-covered creatures. So do I believe that people are seeing them? Yeah, I do. Do I believe that they're resident to the area? No. These things are something else. And do I believe that they're traveling around in spheres of light? No. I have associated the light form phenomena with reports of these things because it's the reports have come in conjunction with the cryptid report. But I realize not everybody's going to subscribe to this way of thinking, and I'm not here to convert people. All I'm doing is taking people's reports, people's accounts, and relaying them in the most honest, truthful way that I can, Steve.
It does seem that these things are temporarily physical, something temporal. That there was interesting. There was a report in one of Linda Godfrey's books. I think it was Monsters Among Us, and I'm going to stretch here. I think it was in Pennsylvania on Route 80 something. A man's
Okay.
driving at night, and he sees this light going through the woods, and it's coming down toward the road, and there's a dip, and he's thinking this guy is on some kind of a four wheel. Uh, 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 device, and he's afraid the guy's going to come down the cliff. So he slows down, and this light continues across, and it actually, according to his testimony, morphs into some kind of a dog man type creature that then takes three leaps and is across the road. So that we do get those kind of reports sometimes. But what I was thinking, you were saying, is it true that a lot of these call them werewolf dogmen or whatever are seen in conjunction with some of the ancient mounds?
Yeah, without a doubt that there's definitely a strong association with ancient earthworks and burial mounds. And during the making of Wolflands, we spent a lot of time in the forests of North Yorkshire. And I know I just said we don't have the vast expanses of land, and truly that we don't. But the North Yorkshire Moors National Park, which encompasses more grazing land for sheep and cattle, moors, ancient barren moors, and forest and woodland, covers about 525 square miles. And so some people might say, well, that's enough room for something to hide and evade detection. I still don't think that these things are there in the manner that some people want to believe, as in a flesh and blood creature that's foraging some kind of existence. But the actual light form phenomena, Steve, that's associated with them, in 2019, myself and a guy called Lee Hayward visited the cliff tops of an area called Bempton, which is where a lot of the reports in the Truth Proof books originate from. Lee, very skeptical, but in a good way. I don't mind people questioning everything. I think as researchers, yourself included, myself included, we've got to look for the answers. We've got to and the plausible answers. And if it doesn't lead us down a route that's paranormal, then tough, because not everything can be truly unexplained. But so that's the nature of Lee Hayward. He came up to the cliff tops because he's something of an aircraft expert, and he believed the orange spheres of light that I've been documenting for decades out at sea and over this area of land was some kind of misidentified aircraft on my part. And we'll get to the cryptids in a moment, Stevie. It was November the 14th, 2019, and we drove up what's called Cliff Lane to the cliff tops, about just under a mile long single track road, and he's asking me about the lights. And as if to order, when he'd said, what do they look like? An orange sphere of light lit up in the sky to the right-hand side while I'm driving. And I said, like that. It just looked like tangerines, if you can picture the tangerine, but arm's length about the size of a pea. And he kind of said, oh, right. Oh, yeah, yeah. I said, well, that's what we're looking for. And this doesn't happen, Steve, all the time. I'm going, after we've done this interview, I'll be up there tonight. There'll be several of us up there, and I'm there 3, 4, 5 times a week. And I can go up for a full year and see nothing. It's, and somebody could come up the day after and report something or have a little bit of footage of these things. But let me get to my point. So, I set cameras up on the cliff tops. I'm talking to Lee, and over the course of that night, these spheres of orange light presented in 2s and 3s over the sea, literally just blinking into existence. And by the time you fired the camera up, they've switched off again. That's how it appears. It's just like a light switch going on. They're not illuminating any area around them. So this is continuing, and I'm looking out to sea, and I turn to face Lee, and in the field with us is the most monstrous orange sphere of light. I've never seen one as big or as dramatic as that ever. It's close, and as I'm pulling the camera around and putting it on, it's kind of imploding and it's gone. It blew Lee away. Lee's now kind of converted. He's not looking for some kind of earthly logical answer. So where are we going with the cryptids? During lockdown, during COVID, so this is some time afterwards, I found myself on the cliff tops. I rang a farmer friend of mine up because I knew it would be private, and asked if I could park on his land and walk over and observe the sky, which he agreed. And I took a chap with me who's come with me for years called Bob Brown. And we took a flask and we got warm clothing on. We set everything up, and a man walked along the cliff tops with a dog towards Flamborough Head. And he asked us what we were doing. Are we looking for the seabirds? Because there's a wonderful seabird colony there, and they do get a lot of bird watchers. And I said, I just kind of nodded and smiled. It weren't dark. So when he comes back, it's getting dark, and he realised we weren't looking for the seabirds. And it will relate to Lee Hayward's story in a moment, people. Don't think I've just left that. So he's talking. He said, well, what are you looking for, lads? What? I said, well, it not be your thing, but I'm trying to film or document these spheres of orange light that are seen over the sea. He said, I've lived in Reeton, which would be about 3 to 4 miles down the coast all my life. I've got windows that overlook the sea. I've never seen them. So, which is fine, he's being honest. He's talking to us. And just as he's about to leave, this guy and his dog, Bob said, what about unusual animals? And he said, what do you mean? Well, what we do, we're quite careful not to talk about the werewolf type creature. I think it's just a little bit too much for some people to take in. And I don't blame them. We say, well, there's been a big black cat seen for years around here. As people know, they're not native to the UK, but we do get reports of them. So Bob wasn't lying. He said, have you ever seen it or heard any reports of that? He said, no. He said, but I'm going to tell you something now. He said, I have seen something. He said, and I haven't even told my wife. And we said, go on then. We're kind of all ears. And he made his dog sit down. And he said, well, it was in 2019. He said, and I went onto the beach at Reeton where he lives, which would be, like I've said, 3 to 4 miles away. He said, and I'm walking down the beach. He said, and there's a full moon. And before anybody latches onto this one, I don't think there's any correlation to the full moon and silver bullets. That's for movies. But he said it was a full moon. He said, and this dog's very clever. It was a hunting dog, by the way. It was a pointer. He said, and he stands slightly different if he sees a pheasant to if he sees a rabbit. He says, and I kind of know what he's seen or what he's sensed. He said, and I can't work his body language out. He said, because he looks puzzled and he's stood, he's clearly seen something. And then I look onto the cliff halfway up, and because these cliffs slowly go from about 45 degrees to a vertical 420-foot drop. And he's not there, he's just on the 45-degree angle. He said, and I can see something. So I pull my binoculars out and I look up onto the cliff, and I don't know if it's a goat or a small pony. And I think, what's that doing on side of the cliff? He says, and with that, it stood up on 2 legs. He said, I kid you not, this thing stood up, and we're just all ears. We can't believe what this guy's telling us. And he said, although I couldn't see directly looking at me, I knew it was looking down at me and the dog. I said, did you feel frightened? And he said, no, if I'm being truthful. I'd like to say we're terrified, but it fits the story more. But he said, no. He said, and it turned and went on its way across the top of the cliffs. Now, what makes this story interesting, I checked the full moon in November 2019, which is when he said it was, and it was the 12th of November. That was 2 days before myself and Lee Hayward saw this huge sphere of light. Is there a link? Well, obviously, Steve, we can't say yes, but it's interesting nevertheless. I find it fascinating that such a thing could, such a correlation in close proximity by date and by location should crop up. I don't know what your views on that are.
Well, I think that many researchers do find patterns. We do have to be aware of that, and sometimes things kind of fall into place. I wanted to pursue the mound thing a little bit more. Now, of course, Linda Godfrey brought the Dogman werewolf into consciousness back in the 90s when she wrote The Beast of Bray Road. and
Yeah.
started investigating the strange sightings around Elkhorn. And in her second book, Hunting the American Werewolf, she says by accident she was looking at a book of effigy mounds in southern Wisconsin, and also she had a cluster of dogman sightings in the same area. She found that the dogman encounters and certain effigy mounds overlapped almost perfectly, and they were what they call panther mounds and water spirit mounds. Now, a panther mound is if you imagine a panther and just drew a simple line around it, you've got the head, a little bit of a tail, and the feet. And then the spirit mounds, they seem to be a little bit smaller and the same kind of shape, except that their tail is long and pointed. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think it goes back to Native American beliefs that these creatures were there to somehow protect the mounds. So there's no question there's some kind of a link between these manifestations and these mounds. And the other, to go to your point about these things not being strictly flesh and blood, can you imagine there would have to be some kind of a colony of these things in certain numbers in order to survive over all these years?
Yeah, and I'm glad you pulled me back to the mounds, and we'll go to that in a moment. But you're spot on to address that one. Can you imagine the amount of calories? Something as big as what people describe in many instances, 7 to 8 feet tall, quite muscular, fast. So obviously, its metabolic rate is going to be quite high. It's going to burn a lot of calories. Can you imagine the carnage that we would see on the land? In the form of livestock deaths and wildlife deaths. The amount of food that these things would have to consume if they were living here, it'd be an impossible task to go undetected. So I do believe that. And jumping back to the earthworks, the ones that I'm talking about round here, most of them are Neolithic, so they're 3,500 years old. And I suppose there's a few ways of looking at it, and I'm full respect for Linda Godfrey, bless her. But what if ancient man knew the significance? What if the American Indians knew the significance of these strange areas, these strange locations, and the activity took place there before the burial mounds, and they placed their dead there because of the reverence of the land, because of the significance? That's just one idea that I've had. Or it could be that the burial mounds are placed there in these special areas, and somehow these creatures, call them werewolf, dogman, whatever you want to call them, are somehow summoned or created through the thought process, like Toplas. Yeah, it's a difficult one to get your head around what came first. And I can see that probably your line of thinking is that these things are there to protect the burial mounds, and it's not a bad way to look at it when you go back and you look at places like Egypt, and you've got the dog-headed, is it Anubis? And then I think it's the Mayans had Exol, and a lot of these ancient civilizations had dog-headed deities that somehow protected or were guardians of the dead. So
Yes.
it carries through, Steve. So I think there's a lot of truth, or a lot to be considered with what you've just said. Yeah, I really do.
I think I remember reading in the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. He wondered what came first, the strange lights, and then they made as you said, made the mounds in respect to those, or did they make the mounds first, and somehow some kind of a residue was formed afterwards? And I frankly don't know, but I think there is an inexorable link between the two.
Yeah, and I wonder if excuse me, I wonder if we human beings, not just UK, not just America, all around the world, because everybody's got a different take on what we're dealing with, what the intelligence is, and how it presents and how it looks to us. you know, if you went to different parts of the world, I would imagine we'd all be looking at something similar, but a slightly different take on the phenomena and how these things look. And it makes me wonder if it's not the actual intelligence that is the phenomena giving us what we want. In some instances, so you know, it might be a far cry for some people to sort of think about that one, but you know, ufologists see UFOs and ghost hunters see ghosts, that kind of thing. And it's all coming from one source, and I don't mean a godhead that way, but all coming from one type of intelligence. And so, I mean, because sometimes, you know, the unexplained phenomena is almost amoeba-ish in its behavior and how it
Yes.
starts. Yeah, do you know? Let's just jump to the poltergeist phenomena, and people who have activity taking place will say in their home, any home in the world. It doesn't always start with drama and sort of seeing movement and things flying around. Usually it starts very subtle. You'll hear a noise like a light switch clicking in a hallway, or you'll hear something like a small stone rattling on laminate floor. I'm using examples of my own here, but then it grows, and it's almost, Steve, as though as our awareness grows to the intelligence that is the poltergeist, the phenomena of the poltergeist grows in either in boldness or intelligence. I don't know how it works. I don't know the mechanics of what's happening, but I know that in some instances, I wouldn't say all, but I would think the majority in the poltergeist type intelligence, it grows as our awareness grows with it. I don't know if you've looked into the poltergeist at all. I mean,
Yes.
it fascinates me.
Well, it also I mean, I think there may be something to people that are disturbed or focused on something or have some kind of issues, and this is kind of a excess residue of mental energy, perhaps. But on the other hand, a lot of people that saw the Mothman creature or apparition in the middle '60s went home afterwards and had an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena. And we both heard stories of people seeing UFOs in close proximity that have also had outbreaks of poltergeist phenomena. So we wonder, how do we tie these things together? How do we explain the poltergeist phenomena as a whole?
Well, yes, exactly, and I don't profess to have the answers, but you touched on there outbreaks of kind of mental concentration. That, you know, the person who's seen the Mothman in the '60s suddenly when after the sighting, things of an unexplained nature start to happen more. It could that be that after seeing such a thing, his perception of what can be and what cannot be is broken down, and he's more open to the in his belief system that anything is possible. Maybe it's just the firewall that we present, that we sort of have instilled into us from birth. Maybe that firewall is broken down and we're able to, I don't know if we're able to access it, or whether the unexplained, the intelligence that is the unexplained, is able to influence us more, because popular culture and the 20th century culture sort of shuns any notion. Science shuns notions that the UFOs could be real in many instances, that the cryptids could actually be something that's gone undetected since for millennia. But unfortunately for science, and it must really frustrate it, these things have stood the test of time and are reported time and time again, and they don't have an handle on it. They've not got an answer to what these things could be, no matter how much thought and effort they throw at it. And it must be difficult, because obviously everybody wants, you know, academia wants to solve these enigmas with the use of science, and they've not come to that yet. I mean, even now, you know, with the congressional hearings and the release of new information and this, I don't know, are we ever going to get disclosure? I don't think we are. But where am I going with this? Even now, we've changed the terminology and we're calling them non-human. Could that be because that people actually realize that these things aren't extraterrestrial? Could that be the reason that name's been changed, or part of the reason? Because the staple explanation, I'm sorry for jumping about here, people, but the staple explanation for somebody who'd seen some spectacular UFO to put these people down, but the powers that be, academia and science, was these things couldn't possibly traverse the vast distances of space to
Right.
get here. Well, did anybody actually stop to say, they're already here? These things are already here. I mean, they could be residing under the oceans of the world, Steve. As we know, there's probably 90 to 95% of the oceans of the world that are uncharted. So that's a vast area that nobody really knows a lot about. And I've coined a phrase here, Steve. I mean, I loved saying it. And I call it the sub-universe. The submersed universe could be where a lot of this comes from. And there's a strong possibility that there's a lot of things beneath the oceans of the world, beneath the sub-universe that are just waiting to be discovered.
Let me do my quick intermission here, and we'll get right back to it.
Okay.
You are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Today, I'm talking to Paul Sinclair, investigator and researcher in the UK, about his books, Truth Proof, The Truth That Leaves No Proof. Paul, I want to tell you that I watched Wolflands last night. I streamed it on Amazon US. And people need to know you can stream it from Amazon US or Amazon UK. And you can even go to the website where you can buy Paul's books and order a hard copy. And I've got to tell you, Paul, I was just blown away. It is so well done. It has extremely high production values, the editing, the music, the pacing. I love the way you put together the documentary, and you kind of you focused on different people, different witnesses, very credible people, and you kind of go back and forth with the purpose of showing the patterns and the connections between these people and their reports.
Well, thank you. And I need to say now, people, I haven't paid Steve to say that. Just
No,
that's
ladies and
absolutely.
gentlemen, pursue it, stream it, buy it. It is absolutely, and it's chilling too. I mean, it's just a straightforward documentary, but it's like watching a suspenseful horror movie.
I'm so pleased you've said that, and I'm going to be biased, people, but I personally think that Wolflands is certainly the best documentary of its kind to come out of the UK. But I think it can compete with anything as in the genre. And what we've got are first-hand witnesses, and we've not just got like the usual documentary, just one or two people sat talking in a cafe over a coffee and then going back to some reconstruction. I've been into the forests in many instances with these witnesses. Everybody, I've written everything in the documentary. My daughter and a guy called Mick Park have produced the music. And like you, do you mind if I just talk about that for a moment, Steve?
Oh, please, and just one note on the music. I am a huge fan of film, documentary, and television composition, music. And I'm very appreciative of various composers, and they have done such a superb job.
It's incredible, and we were so fortunate. I've got one of my daughters with 4 girls is an opera singer, so she's done the harmonies, but her husband also they have a small music studio, and I was so lucky whilst writing the books. I was contacted by a guy called Mick Park, and he just told me he loved what I was doing. He was interested in it. And when I got to know Mick, it turns out Mick's a music producer who's worked with some of the top artists in the world, such as U2 and Ruby Turner. And there's a lot on the list. And he said he'd like to help us produce the music for Wolflands. So he teamed up with my daughter doing the harmonies, and they've produced this amazing piece of music that is bespoke for the film. And all the writing for it I've done, and yeah, I'm proud of it, and I guess it shines through with what I'm saying to you guys. So I don't want to labour and brag too much, people. But even if you don't watch it, read the reviews. That kind of tells you all you need to know. I mean, and people like Martin Groves, you will spoken to Martin Groves, I would think, Steve, and and other ufologists and cryptid researchers, Josh Turner and other people, they've watched Wolflands and been blown away by it. So it really, you've done your job if the key cryptid researchers and experiencers are impressed by what we're doing. But do you want me to tell you any accounts from within the documentary?
Yes. Really whet their appetite and get them energized to watch it or purchase it.
Well, one of them that fascinates me is, and most of them are werewolf stroke dogman related, but with there's light form phenomena associated with it as well, and there's a human aspect where people were found in unfortunate circumstances in a place called Dalby Forest. Now, I'll not go into too much detail about that. They'll let the film do the talking, but there's a forest in the UK about 25 miles from where I'm sat now, called Broxer Forest, which is a fascinating name. It's an unusual name. It's not an English name. I think it's Portuguese. And Broxer, in some cultures, a Broxer is a shape-shifting demon. So that's fascinating that something took place in a forest called Broxer. And it's on the edge of what's called the Forge Valley, which all I just find these names and these connotations. And it's near a place called Hackness, which in ancient times was called Hachanos, which means with the whiskers, which is another strange connotation. But let me jump into the Broxer sighting. 3 guys, Jimmy, Steve, and the one I'll call witness number 3, who hasn't gone on film. Jimmy decided to find a location for him and his 2 friends to go wild camping, something that they did 2 or 3 times a year. They'd do a bit of fishing, bit of camping, not interested in unexplained phenomena in any way, shape, or form. And they've done it for years. These men live in close proximity to each other in a place called Rotherham, and they travelled to Broxer Forest, which would be about 140 miles away, on this weekend. And where we're talking about, it's in a deep ravine. The ravine is, you can go down the ravine. You don't need ropes, but it's very, very steep. And it's 700 to 800 foot into the bottom of this ravine. And there's a river running through it called the River Derwent. And as they're going into the ravine, he said it's getting quite late and we'd never been before. And, it's getting dark. We're setting up camp. We'd just got camp set up as night folded in, and it had took us a long time to get down with us camping gear and everything. And witness number 3, when he got down into the bottom of the ravine, said, "I don't like it. We've got to leave. I don't feel comfortable." And Jim and Steve looked at each other, and then they looked at witness number 3. I'm sorry for calling him that, people, but that's what I'm doing, because I just don't want to reveal his name. And they thought, well, what's the matter with him? He's not normally like this. And he's really, really uptight and agitated. So he said, we lit a fire, small fire, got a little bit of food on the go, and just settled down, got the hammocks up and the tarps sort of set up, and settled down for the night. But witness number 3 is adamant we need to leave. He said it were dark. He said it were really hard to get down into the ravine. In some places, he says, we'd come down on his bottoms, on his backsides, because it was so steep. He said, and I couldn't negotiate leaving this ravine in the night. He said, we probably wouldn't even find path to get back to the car, because they'd parked it on a logging road. So they resigned to stop in the night, and they told him he'd got to stop the night, and despite his agitation, he said, and sometime, I don't know, between, 11:30 and 12:30, witness number 3 saw this first. He said, look over there. And he says, and a huge pair of amber eyes had lit up in the darkness, self-illuminating. Now, he said they looked human in shape, but Jim said, I couldn't think of an animal, and this is his exact words, to assign those eyes to. And he held his fist out and put his hands, the width apart of these eyes. He said, and I just couldn't work it out. He said, they were only about 3 foot off the ground, these eyes. Said, and this guy who was with them is getting more and more frightened, more and more agitated. He says, and we're trying to calm him. Steve said, we're trying to calm him. We can see these eyes, but I know how far away they were. Steve. They were 42 feet because I went into the forest with a surveyor's tape and in daylight, and we found their camp and we measured it to where this thing was. So they were 42 feet away. He said, and we can see these eyes and I just can't work it out. But we're worried he's going to run off into the darkness. But he's in the middle of nowhere. There's no habitation. There's nothing. He said, so in the end, Jim said, I stood up and I took 2 or 3 steps towards these eyes and I made a few hissing and shooing sounds and waved my arms about. He said, and the eyes disappeared. He says, and I thought, oh, thank God for that. That's going to be end of that. And I turned round in the firelight, he said, and I could see Steve and witness number 3's expression. And the jaws have dropped and they look horrified. He said, and I turned back, and I'm actually saying it as these guys have said it. He said, and I just thought, oh my God. He said, because from these eyes that I'd seen 3 foot off the ground in the undergrowth, the bracken and what have you, he said, I can now see the full form from the waist up of something. He said, I don't think there was a full moon, but there was enough light to highlight something with huge shoulders, arms, a monstrous head with ears that looked ridiculous. He said, if you would have asked me to draw a werewolf, I would not have drawn that. Its ears looked too big. They were stuck upright with tufts of fur on them. He said, and we can't believe what we're looking at. We're all terrified. And we're clinging on to number 3 because we think he's going to run away. And it's horrific to look at. And Steve said, we just froze to the spot, and this thing's just there, staring at us with these illuminating eyes. He said, we thought it was growling, but after a while we realized it was its breathing, which leads us to what you touched on earlier, Steve, that these things, when they are infiltrating our environment, there is a physical presence to them. And he said every so often, and we jump to Steve now, he said this thing would turn, I think he said, to its right. He said, and you could see its muzzle and everything. It was Steve that said, if you'd have asked me to draw this thing and said, draw a werewolf, I wouldn't have. He says it was ridiculous. It stuck out like Wile E. Coyote. He said he said it was ridiculous how, he says, and the size of it. And when Jim shooed it away and turned round and they saw it stand up, Steve said, there were no movement, jerkiness when it stood up. He said if you got 2 ping pong balls and put them in tubes of water and slowly filled them, it just rose like a machine. But the size of it was overwhelming. He said it was just, I'd never seen anything as big. In the end, and it's staring at them, not making any sound, occasionally turning, I'm sure he said to the right. Let me just stand there, yeah. And he said, in the end, he said, I just wanted it to end. And he meant he wanted it to end him. He says it was so frightening to look at. I daren't look at it, yet I could still in my peripheral see the glowing eyes. And I wanted it to be over. I needed it to end. And the night passed and this thing still stared at them. And this is what's fascinating. They've no recollection of how long they looked at it or how long it was there. Jim seems to think it was there a few hours, but acknowledges that he didn't realize it had gone till first light. Steve said it left at first light, but they never saw it go. When they realized it had gone, all 3 of them hastily packed up their kit. Now, here's the other bit that's interesting. Witness number 3 said it's still here. And he was saying it's still watching us. And they'd traveled a fair distance up this ravine when witness number 3 said, it's gone now. We're okay now. It's gone. So, one more thing I need to draw back. And we never touched on this in the documentary. I'm pretty sure we didn't. But there was some communication with number 3, without a doubt. Because at one point during this encounter, number 3 said to Jim, and these lads are Broad Yorkshire. So for your American audience, you can hear me talking in this Yorkshire dialect or slang. He turned to Jim and went, it don't want it don't want the ear, Jim. It wants thee to go. And then he looked at Steve and he said, and thee, Steve, it don't want your ear. It wants you to go, which implies to me, and the lads had never asked him, they've not asked him, that it was communicating with him. Or how would he have known it wanted them to go? You know, he didn't say we've got to go. He said them two had got to go. It seems like he was the catalyst to the sighting, to the encounter. So that's the Broxer one. And any views on that, Steve? Before
Well,
we
well, you can when you these people are recounting their experiences, you can see their fear as they recount the specific experience they had, and there's something about and the same thing in the U.S. The Dogman encounters. There's sort of an evil, sort of a very negative vibe with these things. Not always with a Bigfoot encounter. The Bucks County Paranormal Group from Pennsylvania spent a night on Lee Hample's farm. Lee Hample has a farm just a stone's throw from Bray Road near Elkhorn, where these things have been seen. He is a mathematician and chemist, and when he was told that these things were around his property, he was scoffing. But then he saw it himself a couple times, and it's very interesting. He had missing time the first time he saw this thing. So you talked about this sort of possible time distortion with these three men, and maybe there's something similar going on there.
Yeah, and it further throws the sightings into what the true paranormal realm, the missing time, and there's threads of similarity that run through all aspects of the full spectrum of the unexplained, Steve, as you will have found out. And the missing time with the alien type scenario, the missing time connotations with the Dogman stroke werewolf type encounters, the missing time with the light form scenario. I received a report a few days not long ago, to be honest with you, from a lady who lived in the village of Hunmanby, farmstead of the Houndman. And just temporarily if I may, jump away from the cryptid.
Oh, sure.
And tell you this one. It's a small village in North Yorkshire. I'm in East Yorkshire, and we just slip across the border to North Yorkshire, to Hunmanby. And it's a historic sighting, but if it's never been heard before, it's just as relevant. And she goes back to 2011. I think she said her son was about 10 or 11 years old, and they were driving along the back road into Hunmanby. And there's a small island. They have to come down a hill, and they approach a small island. There wouldn't have been much traffic on the road. It's a very quiet road, nighttime, quite unlit. She said, and as we're approaching the island, she said, there's myself, my sister, and my young son in the car. Sister sat in the back of the car. She did actually say there were 4 people in the car, but she didn't alert to who the 4th one was. So I'm assuming sister and son are sat in the back of the car, because, and I'll get to that in a moment. She said, and as we approach this roundabout, this little grass island, I can see coming towards us from the coast, and the sea would be about 3 miles away, a huge black triangle, absolutely monstrous in size. And I can see a light on each corner, or each point, should we say. Said, and I stopped the car to watch it. There's no traffic on the road. And my sister put the window down, and she sat onto the rim of the door with the window down and looked up in the sky as this thing approached. And she said it had a dome on the top. That's how low it was. She could see a dome on the top of the triangle. When it got over the top of them, it stopped momentarily. Then it sped off, she said, at speed, and was instantly gone. It becomes strange now, because she said the next thing that we remember, I'm at the junction and I'm at the White Swan pub. Now, it's a strange little village, Hunmanby. I don't know how it can contain or have 3 pubs in the village, a fish and chip shop, a Chinese restaurant, a small supermarket, and it's a tiny village. It has everything. So anyway, she said, I'm at the junction of the White Swan pub. Now, I know this road, and I would think when you leave that roundabout, you could be at that pub in 3 minutes. She estimates that they'd lost 30 minutes of time at least. She said, I kind of came to as 2 people past the front of the car, and I almost pulled out in front of them. But I've no memory of doing that journey, and I don't know how we'd lost 30 minutes. And suddenly, as she came to, her young son began screaming his head off in the back of the car. We'll say the back of the car. I genuinely don't know, but I think it was the back of the car, but screaming his head off, take me home, take me home. She said, and now this is 2011, it's 2023, still won't talk about it. She believes he knows a little bit more than they know. I've not asked her to work on him and try and get any information. I believe that these things, people should be, if they're going to tell you, they will tell you, with their own free will. I don't want to force anybody or get any information out of them as much as I might want to know what happened. So she said we drove home, totally confused. We knew we'd seen the triangle, but everything, there's a gap. And I call it the time between the time. There's a gap from seeing this thing stop momentarily and speed off to arriving at the White Swan pub. She said we dropped my son off at home, and then we went back out onto the road, into the direction where we saw it. She said, and we got to Wold Newton. So once again, people, Google these areas. You'll see that it's pretty barren. She said, and we could see a huge cluster of lights in a field. And as much as we tried, we couldn't get to the field. We could, they could see it, but we were never close to it. She said, and then we rounded a corner, and suddenly we saw a huge owl. Big white owl that, yeah. We'd never seen an owl as big before. And we momentarily took our eyes off everything. Well, we were approaching a corner and the owl appeared to look at the owl. And when we rounded the corner, the lights had gone, and that was the end of the sighting. But it's interesting that they saw the owl. There's lots of reports of people seeing owls in association with seeing UFOs and other types of unexplained phenomena, Steve. As you know, I'm not telling you or your listeners anything that most people won't be aware of.
It's sometimes even something crazy like a large rabbit. And at the time, you're not really questioning how bizarre it all is.
Yeah, that's correct. And a large rabbit. Yeah, years ago, I lived in a little village called Old Dennerby, and only child, 3-bedroom council property, and it looked onto fields and marshland. My bedroom, the back bedroom, and many things happened there of what I would consider an alien type interaction. That's why I wrote the book, The Night People. But I've got a recollection of seeing it flooded. If there'd been heavy rains, this marshland, it would flood the land. And I can remember looking down the fields onto this flooded area and seeing what looked like a metallic pencil over the water, on the edge of the water as well. There's no movement in this water. It's static. It was the banks of the River Don. They would burst when you'd got heavy rain, and they would spill over into this area of marshland. Well, I suppose that's why it was marshland. And I can remember seeing people, or I don't know whether they were beings. I've no urge to say I saw aliens, but it looked so bizarre because they were this metallic, what looked like a pencil from where I were looking, over the top of the water, not floating. They were there, and they were 2 or 3 beings or people. But where it became strange for me, because I've got this memory, I can see them, but suddenly then I saw a huge owl, and it were almost in my face, which is impossible. And it just rose up, yeah, and I could see it. And I can remember going to my grand's house at a place called Adwick-on-Dearne after this had happened, because I don't think I shared any of this with my parents. I wouldn't have shared it with my dad because he was he's passed now, and I'm loath to say too much bad about him, but he liked to use his hands. He wouldn't negotiate anything. If I'd been naughty, I didn't get talked to. I got smacked. So I wouldn't share any of this with him. But I remember going to my nan's, and she had the Observer book of British birds, and I'm looking through this book, and the only bird that I could see that it resembled, and obviously you're only looking at the pages of a book, and this thing looked huge. It just seemed to appear, was a snowy owl, and these big yellow-orange eyes looking at me. And I don't know what the connection there was, Steve. It's a strange one of seeing this pencil-type object over the flooded water and then people. It just an odd memory. And Night People consists of cameos of events throughout childhood that I'd seen and experienced, and there were lots of them, and I've tried not to expand on them and fill the gaps in of what I think might have happened between and what might have happened afterwards. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think a lot of us, I don't think I'm unique. I think a lot of people carry memories of strangeness, and the ones who aren't interested in the unexplained, they kind of shelve it, and it's a painful thing to think about. And then you've got the actual true skeptically minded person to the point of being a debunker who has an experience, and they won't admit it. They won't admit what they've seen and experienced because it shatters the dreams of what they truly want to believe. And that's sad in some ways. And I know people do a full 360, but in some instances they never will. Sorry to jump about there, Steve.
Oh no, that's perfect. You mentioned Night People, which is sort of autobiographical. So let's talk about your books a little bit and where people can get them, and warn them to kind of steer away from Amazon US and Amazon UK, because there are a lot of third-party pirates there putting very high prices on your books.
But without a doubt, it amazes me. Anybody who, on Amazon there are books for sale of mine, the Truth Proof 1 to 4, and people are selling these books for in the UK £1 to £200, £1 to $2 to $300 in the US, which is ridiculous. I took the books off Amazon, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and we've got the truthproof.uk website, and the paperbacks can be obtained through the website, and they're reasonably priced. And you can also look at the Kindles via Amazon, the digital download.
Right.
And obviously we've got the Wolflands DVD, the Wolflands documentary on Amazon Prime, or it can be obtained through the website. And yeah, it's difficult when you see. I've heard other people who've written books sort of get really upset and uptight because their books are commanding hundreds of dollars on these other platforms such as Amazon, and it's not them that's selling them. So there are other ways to get my books, and visit the website. And even if you don't want to read the books, go onto Amazon and read the reviews. That's what I say to people, because there's a lot of people written stuff, and they'll come on a podcast. We do the Truth Proof live stream, and they'll promote a book, but not in all instances. In most instances the books are excellent, but I kind of encourage people to read the reviews, and you get an idea of what somebody's produced.
They are excellent, and I'm telling people, you need to dive into these books. I mean, they're well written, and sometimes, Paul, it feels like I'm right there with you and your colleagues by the cliffs, looking at the strange lights over the sea. And also, I want to say, I think on the Amazon US website, I don't think they show Truth Proof 4 and Night People available in a hard copy. And I was thrilled to see that I could get those from your website. So, because I love to have a hard copy in my hand, and I can dog ear the pages and make notes in the margins and so forth.
Yeah, I were actually surprised. I knew it. I couldn't have been coincidence, to be honest, Steve. That because I know you've looked at the books via Kindle and what have you. That you'd ordered the books, and they're on the way to you. The actual hard copies, and the signed and signed and tracked.
Yeah,
they'll be arriving at your door.
Appreciate it. And
no, I think the appreciation's from me, because it's great to have the support. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm halfway through number 3 right now, and so I've had the books for quite a while, but I often get sidetracked with so many books, so I'm always bouncing around. One other thing about Lee Hample's property and your experiences with the Flixton Werewolf and other places, Lee Hample has set up trap cameras, and he has all kinds of photographs. It seems like there's some kind of technology going on in the background, not just strange lights, in conjunction with these creatures. And there's something that seems to interfere with the photographing the activities of these beasts. The cameras will fail at certain parts. And there's also situations where footprints will appear in the middle of nowhere, go along for a while in the snow, say, and then disappear. Is now I know there's a lot of strange light phenomena in conjunction, at least in the same areas that these creatures are seen. But is there any other parallels there that you can think of?
Uh, yeah, I mean, we've used trail cams with little to no success. I've got to admit, I spend an awful amount of money on cameras, more than my wife likes me to spend, if I'm being truthful. And we'll get to some of that in a moment if we've still got a little bit of time.
We do.
EMF meters, tri-field meters, Geiger counters, thermal cameras. There's a very expensive thermal camera that I take out with me. Have we had any luck? It's strange because we've used tri-field meters and EMF meters for years, mainly to break the monotony of setting a camera up on the cliff tops, covering it with some material so that the damp air don't penetrate it, and standing there for hours in what's relatively boring conditions. We take tri-field meters with us and EMF meters. Thermometers, because there's temperature fluctuations in the area where you can step 10 foot to one side and suddenly it's warmer. We'd had no success with the EMF meters, and then or the tri-field meters, and then it started. Don't ask me why. There's nothing there of an electrical nature on these cliff tops. And in 2021, Mick Park, who I've just been talking about, who's helped with the music or produced the music for Wolflands, came to the area with his wife, and they rented a cottage, and on an evening, myself and Mick, up into the early hours, went onto the cliff tops of Bempton, Flamborough and Speeton. And I was talking to him, and a few things sort of came out or on about. We'd had some incredible readings with a Geiger counter where the animal mutilations were taking place through 2017 to 2019. And in some of the areas where these unfortunate animals were found, we got incredible readings with the Geiger counter. But that's not what I'm on about at this moment. And I said I'd got an EMF meter in my bag. He said, he said, put it on. I said, let's see what happens while we're walking along these cliff tops in between about 11:30 and 12:30 at night. So I put this one on. It's got a visual display that just flashes lights that go into the red. There's other ones with little meters on them. I've got about 5 of them, and I got this one in my bag. And we don't ask it questions as in, is anybody near us right now, or the typical kind of spirit type questions. And this thing's on green, and I think we're walking along the cliff tops, and there's nothing happening. And I said something like, if there's anything around us now, any intelligence around us now, could you put some energy into the EMF meter and make it move, make the lights move? About 3 seconds, this thing just kind of redlined. And wow, it's never done it before. And we've gone up there for years, myself, Bob Brown, a group of people. I mean, there'll be a group of people up there tonight when I go up. We'll be up there till late. And I don't know whether my wife likes that, so she can watch TV and just sort of sit with little dog eating sweets, or whether it annoys her. Sorry for digressing there. But so anyway, as our enthusiasm grew, because we almost seemed like we'd got a reaction, I said, could you do that again, please? 3 or 4 seconds. Bosh, it's done it again. So Mick says, I'm going to film this. And he got his phone out. And need to stress here, people, that we have tested this. If you put an iPhone or an Android phone within 2 or 3 inches of the EMF meter, you'll get a reaction. He's about 8 foot away, and I'm walking down the cliffs. And we've got it on film. So if you want to go to the Truth Proof YouTube channel, you can see these off the cuff EMF filming that Mick Park did that night. It's on there. I don't know what it's called, but it'll be use the lettering of EMF, startling EMF results or something like that. And we get to where we're about 30 foot away from where 2 military guys on February the 7th, 2019, claimed to have seen a cryptid type creature. February the 7th, 2019. And this thing's reacting. As soon as I open my mouth, Mick said it's almost reading your mind. and he's filming, and it did it. And he goes, "Where are we now, Paul?" And I'll talk you through basically what he said. And I said, we're very close to where the military guys had their experience in 2019, about 30 foot away. And I walked through the gates, and it just sort of flashes round, and it's redlined. There's nothing there, people. You've got the North Sea. We're on the edge of a 200 to 300 foot sheer drop to the North Sea, and we've got farmland to the right. There's no habitation, there's no lighting, there's no cables, there's nothing to make this happen. And I said, "Did you get that on film, Mick?" And he went, "No," because I'd got my back to him. So I turned to Mick. He says, ask it some questions, Paul." And I'd literally hold it there, and he's got the film on me, and it's lit up. He's got a torch there. I said, "Could you give us a burst of energy, please?" 2 to 3 seconds, it just redlines, and it stays there. This is so I'm not one of these people talking to you now, Steve, who's saying this and you can't find it. It's on the YouTube channel, this bit of footage. I said, "Can you stop, please?" And it stops. And I hold my hand to my chin. I'm with the EMF meter in the other hand held out, and it's off. And I go, words to that effect. It might not be the exact words. I go, "Can you do that again, please?" Bosh! It does it again, and it's doing it. And I just say thank you. And we've been getting results. What they mean, Steve, I don't know, but we've been getting results like that now since 2019, and I don't mean every night. And the strange thing you touched on earlier, the guy, did you say the farmer who didn't actually believe that this cryptid existed, and he's since seen it? The strange thing is the people that we're taking out there with us to hopefully they can experience some type of phenomena. They're the ones that are being almost being shown, because it's reacting to new people. It's weird. It's strange. Or I wouldn't say disbelievers, but new people, such as Lee Hayward, when we drove and he wanted to see the light forms to explain what they were, and he gets to see them, and he's now changed his mindset completely as to what it is we're dealing with. And I would imagine the farmer, I don't know if you know this guy, but
yes, I do. I've been to his farm, and he gives presentations for a couple hours. He's over the last 10 years, he's taken thousands of photographs of strange anomalies, light anomalies, and even he's had deer kills on his road nearby. He'll pull the carcass off and leave it there, aim a camera on it, and after a while, you'll see a mist form. You can tell by the timestamp that time is moving. And then later on, the carcass has vanished, and there's no drag marks or footprints. This has happened at least a dozen times.
Do you know there's so many similarities? And just before I jump to a similarity, am I right in thinking originally this guy was not really on board with believing that this thing was real?
No. Some of his neighbors said, there's a werewolf that lives in those woods back there. And he's looking at them like they must be crazy. And then there was that night he saw it. And then later on, he realized he was missing an hour of time.
How crazy is that? It's almost as though he's being given verification.
Yes.
For some, well, not for some reason. Well, I don't suppose we'll ever understand the mechanics of this exotic science that's working amongst people. But
now stay with your train of thought here. But after you're done, there's one more story I want you to tell before we kind of wrap it up, and you tell everybody where to contact you. But please go ahead.
Yeah. Where am I going with this? Yeah. Back in 2017, myself and my wife went to a place called Danes Dyke, which is a Neolithic earthwork close to our home. And there's a guy who used to live in Danes Dyke. He'd lived there for 13 years, called Peter. Lovely guy. Lived in a tent in the dike, all weather conditions. And we used to take him food. So it was New Year's Day. We took him some food, and he told us we'd just missed the police. And we asked him why. And he said, well, they came to ask me if I'd seen anything unusual. He said, in particular, a very strange looking dog, which is interesting, isn't it, in nature of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
He said, and he said, they told me that some sheep had been killed in the area. So I did a bit of digging, located the farm, spoke to the farmer and asked him if he would allow me to help him look into what was killing the sheep. Nothing to do with unexplained phenomena. And he said I could. And I'd got permission to go on the land then at 4:30 a.m. And I was doing that 3 or 4 days a week. and I was finding these unfortunate animals, just like you were talking about the deer. And it wasn't just sheep that were being killed, and there were lambs in the field as well, but it were only taking the fully grown ewes, and it wasn't using anything out from these animals to feed on. The faces were stripped of skin. In many instances, the ears were removed, the front left leg for some reason, and that was what I was finding, and that's what the farmer had found before I got involved. We were also finding roe deer in a similar condition, badger, and fox. And what I would have to loss what to. I just couldn't understand it at all, I'll be honest. And I'm on those fields with the thermal camera in stupid o'clock in the darkness. One of the reasons was the local farmers told him that it was the crows that were taking the eyes. Well, I wanted to get to these carcasses before daylight, before the crows could get to them. And it was nothing to do with crows. These were in between 70 and 90 kilo ewes. And when he was finding them, the eyes had gone on both sides, the side that were facing the ground as well. So where am I going with this? One morning I got there and I'd spoken to him a few days before, and he said, when he were on the field last, he said one of the lambs, not a fully grown ewe this time, about as big as a Labrador dog. And he said, we'll say 40 kilo, 50 kilo. He said it had disappeared. And it was number 35. They all had a number sprayed on the side of them. As it's probably doing in United States. I don't know, but at any road, he said this one had gone missing. He's got two dogs. He says, I'd done a full search of the field and even looked into the little bit of woodland at the side. There's nothing there. He said a fox must have taken it, or it's escaped. He says, but I don't know how, because it's all fenced. And, I spent years up there, and I didn't find any animals in the actual woodland escaping. So that was that. He told me 2 days before he'd lost this one, and I were there 2 days later, and I get so I knew 2 days before he'd lost one. So I get there, I do a full grid search of the fields, and I'm quite methodical, and it's split into two, and there's a big 5-bar gate splitting them up, and you sort of unlatch this gate, and I'm looking up the field. There's nothing there. The sheep knew me. I got so much respect and kind of love for these sheep, because from first getting involved with this farmer, and the sheep first getting to know me and running off. Sometimes there were 400 on field, and you'd see a flock of 400 sheep just doing a runner because I've arrived with my little dog. Incidentally, my dog couldn't fight its way out of a paper bag. It's just a companion. It's my wife's dog. But from that scenario, I got where over the period of between 2017 to 2019, I could just walk amongst them, and they were fine with me. They were as good as gold. So anyhow, this sheep weren't there. This lamb. I did the search of the woodland, came off and off the fields, and I just turned to shut the gate, and I looked, and I could see it laid in the grass. It weren't there when I arrived. I just couldn't believe it. So I walked over to it, and it's not long grass. Sheep men tend to make sure that the grass don't get very long, and it don't look bloated. It's got its eyes removed, its ears are removed, front left leg. I touch it, I lay my hand on it. It's cold, it's clap cold, but it's not bloated. I rang the farmer. I said, I've just found number 35. He says, you can't have. I said, I have. It's laid here in the field. And he still weren't looking for the unexplained. He said, this thing, he said, the fox must have brought it back. I says, well, if it hasn't eaten it. And so that's another strange one to add to the animal mutilations that were taking place. So jumping to it then, Steve, what did you want to ask me? Apologies.
Well, what I wanted you to do is to finish up with the story that you told in Truth number 1 about the strange man that you and your wife encountered one day on the bicycle, and the even stranger thing he said to you.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm sat here in Bridlington, in my home at Bridlington, and at the bottom of our street it fans out quite wide, and it runs onto Lansdowne Road, and I'm still useless with phones, and I used to get my daughter's cast-off phones, one of the girls, and she'd given me this phone. They'd got a new one, and I had to take it round to this shop to get it unlocked. And this particular day, we left our house, and very cold day, very cold but sunny. And as we're walking down the street, a man started shouting, but he was shouting at me, and I didn't take in what he was saying at first. and he's got his shirt off. I think he's got jeans on, and there's at the side of him, there's a bike lent against the wall, a green bike, a treacle tin green, like a dark green colour, or British racing green, with a little leather bag on back of it. And he's a bald head, this guy. And when I drove up a bit closer and he's on the other side of the road, he starts shouting. And I thought he were talking about the sunlight. You're bringing down the light. You know what you're doing. You're causing trouble. You're bringing down the light. And I just went, oh, yeah, enjoy the sunshine, mate. We've not got many more days of warmth. Winter's nearly upon us. There's kind of words to that effect. And he's still shouting, and I left him, and we walked towards this shop, which would be about up the road, and you'd take a left, and it'd be about, I don't know, 10 minutes away. I said to Mary, I said, oh, that bloke was strange. I said, he were odd. And he looked odd. He looked odd because he'd got all the attributes of somebody who were very fit, but yet his body looked like an action man, actually in texture and everything. He looked like Spam. It was, that he just didn't look right. Yeah, everything, he'd got deltoids. You could see everything that was in place, but it just didn't look right. So anyway, it must have played on my mind, because we left the phone and the guy said, come back at dinner time or whatever, and it'll be ready for you, or in an hour, I can't remember. And I even considered walking back the other way, because it's like on an horseshoe, you could have gone all the way around, but I didn't. And we're walking back, and before I got to the corner of our road, he was there. He'd got his back to us, but I knew it were him. And now he'd put on a tight-fitting dark brown jumper, but still got the bald head. And I went to Mary. I said, "Oh my God, that bloke's there, and I've got to pass him." So before I even got to him, he turned round, and now I knew what he was saying. And he goes, "You're causing a lot of trouble. You've got to stop. You're bringing down the light." I said, "You what?" He said, "You know what you're doing. You're bringing down the light." And lots of words to that effect. Now, I'm not the most articulate person in the world, but I can hold my own in a conversation and even in an argument. But I couldn't beat this guy to the punch with the words, I mean. And he kept saying things to me, and I kept answering him. And I don't know why I stood there. And I kept answering him. And every time I answered him, he talked in riddles, and I don't know, it was so difficult. And it all got back to our bringing down the light. I knew what I was doing. I was causing big trouble. And in the end, he reached out, and because I'm stood facing him, and I'm only short. I'm only 5'6". This guy would have been about 5'8", 5'9". In a jumper, he looked very muscular. Like I said before, looking at him over the road, he looked like he were made of plasticine. It odd. And he'd got a bald head, and he'd got full wraparound sunglasses on, so I couldn't see his eyes. And Mary's just stood to the left of me. And he reached out and touched my wife on the shoulder. And it was one of them moments. I mean, I'm 61 now, and I don't know what year this happened. Something tells me, it'll say it in the book, but it must have been about 2014, 2015. And I looked at him, and I've always been a little bit short-tempered. But as you get older, you have to bite your tongue a little bit, don't you?
Yeah.
But it was one of them moments where honestly, I'm not. It's not some kind of macho thing, but if I've got something to say, I'll say it, regardless of the consequences for whoever I say it to, or myself. And I was just about to grab his hand and hit him, I'll be honest with you, or something like that. And he moved his hand away, and he went, "I'm not talking to her." He just touched her on the shoulder and went, "I'm not talking to her. I'm talking to you. You know what you're doing. You must stop. You're bringing down the light." And I said, "I can't stand any more of this. I'm going. I've had enough of you." And I walked, and he was still shouting me and still saying this. And I don't know, it was a few weeks later. Oh, I need to draw back, because it's ages since I've sort of retold this story, Steve, so apologies. I did ask him where he was from, and he said the location. And when we got in, me and my wife couldn't remember where it was. My wife also noted, because she was looking across the road as we stood in the three people, and she said his bike had no brakes on it. No brakes at all on the handlebars. And he rode a few weeks later, or sometime later, there's a news flash, and a man has vanished at Bempton, disappeared off the planet. He's never been found since. And it wasn't this man, by the way, people, but it said where he was from. And he was from a place in North Yorkshire called Rickle. And soon as they said Rickle, me and Mary went, that's where that guy said he was from, Rickle. And so, you know, I don't know whether there's a connection to him saying that and bringing down the light. I really don't know. And a few days after seeing him, I walked out again. I'm almost in town. And the barber at the bottom of the street, who still remembers this to this very day, come out and he said, that guy were waiting for you. I says, what do you mean? He says, well, we'd been looking at him, me and a couple of customers in the shop, thinking, what is that man doing stood with no shirt on in this weather? Because even though it was sunny, it was very cold. I think it was November time. And he said, he's looking at your house. And as you come out, he engaged. He said, he were waiting for you. And in fact, we're actually going to reenact this, and we're going to do it in a future documentary.
Good.
You know, yeah, and John the barber, Google this place, people. It's still there on Lansdowne Road. John is going to tell us what he observed and what he saw. Another interesting bit, just to add on to this one, Steve, and I'm not sure if I wrote it in the book, but there's a pub near Speeton and Bempton called the Honey Pot, and their son, the landlord's son, they're no longer there now, and I'll not say their names, but they had to get the police, because around the same time that this bringing down the light guy was talking to me, and he didn't say anything about aliens or UFOs, he just kept telling me I'm bringing down the light and I was causing trouble. But about the same time, they had to get the police because a man stopped this young boy who would have been about 14, 15, and told him that he needed to be safe, and that the aliens were coming, and they're watching us, and they're in the skies around Bempton, and lots of sort of freaky things that frightened this young boy and his family. Whether that were the same person, I don't know. I'm not even it's that long since I wrote Truth Proof 1. I'm not even sure if I included that in the book, Steve, if I'm being truthful. But that's about the gist of the strange guy who told me I was bringing down the light.
Well, isn't it ironic that you have been bringing down the light with your research and your books, and you've been making a lot of people uncomfortable, sometimes the common man that just doesn't want to deal with these things, and certainly officialdom. Sometimes I think you've stepped on a few toes now and then.
Yeah, it's not gone well for me in some instances. We've kind of had the frighteners put on us, and I don't think I don't know what I'm doing, because I don't think I'm privy to any earth-shattering smoking gun information. Maybe your job, Steve, maybe my job, some of your listeners, is just to open people's mind up to, not to the possibility, I think we've gone past the possibility, to the truth of what is presenting in the skies, on the ground, in the world around us, the true nature of the intelligence that is the unexplained phenomena. And remember the word, the sub-universe.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, you've heard what a great guest and how interesting Paul Sinclair is. Please pursue his books and his documentary. Paul, tell us all about how to get all that again, and how to contact you and how to hear you.
Yeah, without a doubt. We do a live stream most Thursdays, 7 p.m. UK time. We run for approximately 2 hours. We've had some great, absolutely fabulous guests on, including the person I'm speaking to now, and I've no fear in saying that. I would love to have you back on the live stream.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely great. And you, to be honest, Steve, it sounds like we're patting each other on the back, people, but he made my job easy, because I didn't have to think of much to say.
Well, the same for me, and everything. It's just a fascinating hour. But please, hour plus actually. But please go ahead.
Yes, so we do the live stream, the Truth Proof live stream every Thursday. There's lots of other information on there. We've got the truthproof.uk website. There's lots of UFO reports on there, a lot from around my area that are unique to this website. I don't mind people taking them off the website and using them. If you do that, please give us credit, because you'll not find them anywhere else in the world, some of these reports. So that's all we ask. The books, as we touched on earlier, the Kindle versions are on Amazon. The Wolflands documentary is on Amazon Prime, and the books and the DVD can be obtained through the truthproof.uk website. And Steve, thank you so much for allowing me to promote that a little bit. Thank you.
My pleasure. And sit tight. I want to do the closeout here, but I want to tease the next time we cross paths. I hope to ask you about a gentleman named Bob Brown and his mysterious Man in Black encounter.
Yep.
Okay. Let me do the closeout.
Okay.
The High Strangeness Factor. And by the way, Paul, thank you so much again for being here.
No, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I want to thank our fearless leaders here at the network, Irene Allen Block, Mark Johnson, and Andy Mercer. Also a thank you to Andy for producing the show and composing the end theme. I thank you to Brian Zeller for creating the opening theme. I can also be heard on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files as a correspondent weekly on the same network and many other platforms. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Michigander, deep in the Ohio Valley, inches from downtown Point Pleasant, living on the same road that the Mothman chased cars in November of 1966. Thank you all for listening. Andy and I will see you again in a fortnight. Take care.